So I'm Yasmin, and I'm an editor and a writer, but I also work with a number of non-profit organisations and charities, just advocating for refugee and asylum seeker rights and helping aid integration into the UK. I've been with SolidariTee for almost 3 years, and I'm really excited to be moderating this online panel event with a theme of looking ahead. I'm so pleased to introduce our fantastic expert speakers, Pascal, Sabine and Lina, who are from non-profit organisations and research centres across the globe, all providing long-term change for those experiencing forced migration. So we will start straight away with our first panelist, Pascal, who will introduce his work and give a short presentation about long-term solutions in the context of where he works. Thank you, Pascal.
Well, my name is Pascal Zigashane. It's a privilege to be on this online panel. So I am the founder and executive director of Action pour le Progrès, which is a community-based organization here in Kakuma refugee camp. In Kenya. We are actually providing education program to children who are in between 4 to 7 years old. We are also providing a training on our digital literacy, where we are coming in to solve technical problem in terms of computer repair and phone repair. And we are also currently reaching out to Oxford, especially the RSC pathways, and see how we can have refugees on board the RSC pathway courses that they will later on use to pursue, for those who have interest, to pursue their masters and also PhDs. So basically that is what our organization is doing. And I'm happy to be on this panel discussion, and I'm going to share my screen. I will basically be talking about my context, that is Kenya, and also the issues that refugees are facing in Kenya, and then later on finish with possible solutions that can be there to solve the issue. I hope everybody is seeing my screen. So for my context, in the year 2021, UNHCR Kenya has recorded a statistics of 539,84 refugees. This is not just a number, but these are people. These are human beings. And in the same year, the government of Kenya has signed into law a Refugee Act that seeks to manage and protect refugees. And again, Kenya is also one of the countries that ratified the Global Refugee Compact. And when I talk about the Refugee Global Compact, I look at the 4 solutions that are in the compact. The one is to expand access to third country solutions, enhance refugee self-reliance, ease the pressure on host countries, but also support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. And the reason of talking about this in the context, it's because Kenya is also one of the countries that are hosting a large number of refugees in the whole of East Africa. And as much as we talk about the context, it's also good to understand that the protection services are currently becoming difficult to access due to such as corruption. And that takes me to the next slide, which is all about the issues that refugees are facing in Kenya. One of them is a limited movement. Refugees are facing this issue whereby leaving the camp is a process. They have to acquire a movement pass that allows them to go outside the camp, and this should be acquired based on a reason, of which sometimes is also difficult to get this document. Even if you have a reason, you might also face delay in the urgency of what you are going for outside the camp. It also happens at the level whereby you want to travel outside the country, let's say for a conference, for a training, for education program. You also have to get the convention travel document. And it's also a process, and getting it, it's a bit hectic for refugees to acquire them. You really require a good network for you to get this convention travel document at the government level. It limits the movement of refugees to do whatever they can do, to engage in economic activities, to engage in social activities, but also there is also inadequate self-reliance. And that's why I talked about the objectives of the Global Refugee Compact. It is really inadequate, the support that has been there to ensure that refugees are self-reliant. It is really inadequate, and that makes the camp or the population very unequal, because some are not able to provide themselves, some are not able to come out strongly and use their skills to be self-reliant. There is also unrecognized identification documents. Being a refugee, in my context, you have to go through a process of registration, refugee determination status, and once you finish the refugee determination status, if you are approved to be a refugee, then there's a document you need to get from the government that gives you an upper hand than the asylum seeker, as the alien ID. Now, sometimes when you get this alien ID, you are not able to access other services of the same government that has issued you this identification document. The case study is refugees have faced challenges of registering and get a SIM card that they can use for their phones, that limits them in terms of communication and other benefits that phone has on a refugee, such as mobile banking. The same also limits refugees not to apply for work permit, because you will have to go to a government portal and use your identification document. Now, with the identification documents refugees are issued with, they are not able to use that portal because of the digits that are on the identification document. It really poses problem in terms of them to access their basic rights. And at some point, when you try to use these documents to access education in some institutions, you won't be accepted. We also have an issue that is currently becoming rampant, corruption in the process of receiving humanitarian services. The shift of protection and management of the camp is also coming with its own issues and own challenges, whereby when now it has gone into the hands of the government, corruption has been very rampant than it was when it was in the hands of UNHCR, although there was corruption, but when it fully went into the hands of the government, corruption is really affecting many refugees to get these services. And if you look again at the context I shared, the shortfalls, long-term solutions, I looked at the resettlement. Cases are taking too long, and the number of resettled cases are very limited. So in my context, these are issues that refugees are facing on a daily basis. And building on these issues, I have suggested some solutions based on my context and based on what refugees are facing here in Kenya. One of the solutions is durable solution. I will urge states that ratified the Global Refugee Compact to ensure that there is increase in the number of resettlement. At least refugees can have a place to call home. At least refugees can have a place to exercise their basic human rights and enjoy them. I'm also looking at the full implementation of the Refugee Act 2021 in Kenya, because this act really promises and it has good outlines to support refugees. And in the Refugee Act, part of the solution, I am focusing on employment, whereby we have refugees with education, skills, and talent. They need decent job that pays them so that they can also take good care of themselves and their families, cater for their own bills. The free movement is also indicated in the Refugee Act. I wish this would be implemented so that refugees are able to attend events, opens them to the world. Because at sometimes when you are a refugee, you feel like you don't have a home, but when you attend events, when you're able to travel, you're able to engage in economic activities, you're able to work outside the camp or where you are located. I'm also looking at the acquisition of identification document in the Refugee Act that allows refugees to access other government services within the region or within the country. Part of the solution that I'm also suggesting is to include refugees in the planning process, because I'm also going with the saying, nothing for us without us. So refugees should also be included in the process of any programs that humanitarian organizations are coming up to support them, to assist them. So it's crucial that they participate, it's crucial that they are involved so that they can inform the program and ensure that this really addresses the issues of refugees and comes to solve their problems. The other solution is accountability mechanism. When talking about accountability mechanism, I'm looking at handling corruption issues within the Department of Refugee Affairs that is under the government of Kenya. I'm looking at the IOM, the International Organization for Migration. When refugees are in the process of resettlement, they are facing challenges and they have to corrupt the medical department for them to get this resettlement as soon as it's possible. I'm also looking at UNHCR, some of the employees, some of them, of course, when you are to access these services offered by UNHCR, some will make you or will make the process delay until you are forced to corrupt them. And also NGOs, NGOs working with refugees. Corruption is also affecting. Solving this will also help refugees. At the end, I'm going to underline localization as part of the solution that would work for us in my region is to fund refugee-led organizations. And I'm building on the research funding that the refugee-led research hub did in collaboration with the local engagement refugee research network and Carleton University, and also Oxford. They have demonstrated the evidence of what refugee-led organizations were able to do during COVID-19. So I would recommend part of these fundings, mainly in the recommendation that refugee-led organizations be funded so that they can reach their communities, they can reach their fellow refugees, and part of it is going to enhance the self-reliance. So those are few suggestions I made based on my context and location. So thank you so much for everybody listening to me. Over to you, Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Pascal. That was a really, really insightful presentation. And I really look forward to hearing more of your comments in the Q&A later. Thank you. Let's go to Sabine now, who will also give her presentation. She's from Amira International, who are actually one of our current recipients for SolidariTee's funding as well. So yeah, over to you, Sabine.
Thanks so much, Yasmin. Very happy to be here. Yeah, so I'm Sabine. I'm the director of Amira International. Amira is an organisation whose vision is meaningful access to justice for people in exile through fair legal structures and the provision of effective legal representation whenever it's needed. My own background's in law, in mental health and psychosocial support, and in advocacy as well. And I've had the privilege to work in places for organisations and with people that have informed and inspired my work and my approach. Some examples: I've worked as a key worker in many years ago in a housing and support provider for unaccompanied children in the UK. And there I got my first sort of real taste of how systems that are purportedly designed to support refugees, to support children and to support those in mental health crisis can actually play a role in their policing. As an example, the organisation that I worked for was asked by social services, who commissioned us to provide the housing and support, who were asked by immigration to open the door in the middle of the night to unlock a door that 3 Eritrean girls were staying in order to facilitate one of their removal from the UK. It was a horrendous experience that sort of led me to question a lot of these systems and structures that are set up. I worked for an organisation called Just for Kids Law doing youth advocacy work. They represent and advocate for the most marginalised children and youth in the UK. And there I saw the extent of the barriers to rights in the criminal justice system, in the immigration system, the education system, care system, the list goes on. I saw also the fight involved in striving for justice for those who are excluded, and the need to pursue this working hand in hand and led by young people experiencing this exclusion. And Just for Kids Law went on to set up a project called Let Us Learn, which was campaigning for the rights of young migrants to access education. And that then developed into an independent organisation called We Belong, which was one of the first youth migrant-led organisations in the UK, doing amazing work and really showing how sort of lived experience-led organisations really can achieve a lot. I worked as a director in St Andrews Refugee Services in Egypt. We called it STARS. STARS used to be an organisation staffed by refugees and led by Western migrants. And there I really experienced the power of refugee leadership as the organisation strived for change and became refugee-led. And it became far more effective and relevant in the process of doing so. There was real resistance to this leadership and this power, again, among the systems that were designed for refugee protection, but with a sort of paternalistic and imperialist sometimes approach to protection. I mean, one example is that in the early stages of when we had refugees take on management positions, UNHCR invited management from various NGOs to a community-based protection workshop. And 2 of our managers attended, who were both refugees. One of our other managers, who was not a refugee, was contacted in the middle of this by a representative from UNHCR, and we were asked to remove those management staff from the workshop, being told that they didn't really believe that they could be managers because of their positions, that as refugees they might be biased and might share information about the workshop outside of it. Yeah, I mean, and it was just really, really horrendous. They suggested that others in the workshop would be uncomfortable talking about refugee issues in front of refugees. These sorts of experiences really taught me that lasting change and sustainable solutions won't come from institutions, but instead come from those working to do good and to fight injustice and have an impact at individual and community levels. It's most effective with the leadership of those with lived experience who are at the front line of response, as Pascal was giving excellent examples of, by people who experience barriers to rights and who see at a community level what's needed for change. Amira's work is to enhance access to legal rights and protection, and it's in these areas that I've seen the greatest resistance to lived experience, leadership and change. Refugees are held at arm's length when it comes to legal issues, in particular asylum determination and protection. There's a perspective that they are biased, as I mentioned before, that there's this conflict of interest and that they can't play a leading role. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees has said as much in meetings that I've been at when he's been asked about the role of refugee-led organisations and refugee leaders. We've seen that the lack of coordination with refugee-led organisations and refugees in identifying those most in need of protection, and that as such, that system is failing. We've been explicitly told that refugees can't be impartial, and I quote, that their tribal affiliations mean that they can't be trusted. In many contexts, even where there's excellent work being done by community paralegals, and there are some wonderful examples in Kenya of community justice centres that a number of local and refugee-led organisations are working on. But even where this work is being done, it is often not in the sphere of asylum representation or in identifying cases for resettlement. At STARS, where the legal aid programme took on the asylum representation that Amira was running previously when we had an office in Egypt. The legal aid programme was the programme where it took the longest to involve refugees throughout its programming and at leadership level, because we were told that externally it wasn't possible to have refugees involved in legal representation, that national authorities and UNHCR wouldn't accept it. STAR's leadership in its legal and community outreach programs worked tirelessly to change this, and alongside brilliant refugee lawyers on its staff, and with the eventual involvement of refugee lawyers in its refugee status determination programming, as well as training community paralegals in other RLOs. There's an excellent article written by one of those refugee lawyers working at STARS that I will share in the chat afterwards. In the work that we're doing in Amira, and the contact that we're having with different organisations, we're not seeing that this exists in many other places, this involvement of refugees and refugee lawyers in refugee protection. And it's an area that at Amira we're keen to support, to develop. Last year, we worked with an international refugee organisation to conduct an assessment in the East Horn and Great Lakes and Western Central regions of Africa, and we found a total lack of coordination with refugee-led organisations on asylum and on durable solutions. Again, something Pascal touched on. We also found very limited coordination with local legal actors, in particular when it comes to resettlement. International organisations are going along with this, often taking the approach that these are the restrictions that are in place and we need to work within them. We've made recommendations about the work that can be done, increasing training in refugee law, working with local and refugee lawyers, and ensuring that those most closely connected communities are involved in their legal rights and protection. There has been a move over the last few years towards refugee participation, but the space afforded to refugees is restricted. It seeks conformity to the global systems and structures that we're all operating in. And that limits meaningful change, and it makes real sustainable solutions, frankly, impossible. Amira is working in acknowledgement of the injustice and lack of rights afforded to those without legal status and protection. And we've really shifted our programming since the closure of our legal aid office in Egypt to increase access to legal rights through working in cooperation with local legal actors, really working to strengthen opportunities to address injustice and to impact individuals who are so often forgotten. And to give you a few examples from our programming, so we have our deportation monitoring network, which seeks to address the gap in support for people who are removed or deported once their removal happens, which is often when they then get forgotten. There's a lack of information available on outcomes for those who are removed and the rights violations that they face when they are deported. We want to identify the consequences and individual impact and use these for accountability through litigation and advocacy. We have an online rights in exile platform where we work to put knowledge, resources and connections for refugee protection into the hands of lawyers, into the hands of paralegals and into the hands of refugees. Again, I'll share a link to our platform, and it's a wonderful space for accessing information, whether you are a student or a practicing lawyer. We have our therapeutic legal assistance model that's supported at the moment by SolidariTee to run training in Greece. Through that, we're providing professional development for lawyers representing refugees, enhancing trauma-informed legal practice, interdisciplinary work between lawyers and mental health professionals. And what we're really seeking to do is to create a culture change in representation and decision-making that prioritizes and integrates justice with mental health and well-being. For us as an organization, our next steps to contribute towards lasting change for refugees is to work harder to support coordinated local and refugee-led efforts to increase access to justice. We want to do that in our own work and through others. We really want to build and develop our work as a connector between those working to achieve impact at individual and community levels, and to connect them with the resources they need to do so effectively. And we see that as a real imperative for real solutions and lasting change. I mean, just to finish, the motivation and approach to our work is really important. At STARS, we had this mural on the wall, and there was a quote by a woman called Lila Watson, who was part of an Aboriginal rights group in Australia. And the quote says, "If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together." And that, I think, is a really wonderful example of the approach that we all need to be taking when we're working towards lasting change. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sabine. And I really, I love that quote to end that you ended with as well. Yeah, I really look forward to talking more with you after Lina's presentation. Thank you so much again. And Lina, last but not least, can we please hear from you now? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. Thank you, Sabine and Pascal, for your excellent work. I know we're going to have a very good discussion because we're coming at the same issues from different lenses, but definitely in complete alignment with each other. My name is Lina Sergie Attar, and I am the founder and CEO of Karam Foundation. I'm based outside of Chicago. Karam Foundation, Karam, first of all, means generosity in Arabic, and I started Karam Foundation in 2007. Thank you. We have our work has evolved a lot. Just for my personal background, I'm Syrian American. I'm originally from Aleppo. I lived about 15 years in Aleppo and went to university there as well as school, but I was born in the US. So really going back and forth between the two countries in Syria and the US. And I'm an architect by training. So I didn't come at the nonprofit work from any kind of background in being educated in this background or in business or all these things. It was really more out of necessity. From 2007 to 2011, our work was really focused on this idea of how do we think about generosity in innovative and effective ways and expand the idea of generosity and giving in our own community here in Chicago. In 2011, when the revolution started in Syria and quickly became a humanitarian crisis, that's where the evolution of Karam, as with many other organizations that actually started in that period of time and others that had to pivot, our work became focused completely on Syria and on supporting the Syrian people in all the ways that we could. And so the difficulty of the journey of Karam Foundation really mirrors the conflict in Syria and how when it started, it was, you had to continuously shift what you were doing to support the people and what they needed now. At the beginning of the revolution and the conflict, the beginning of 2011, all of you here, people joining, probably you were very young when this started. So when I used to do a lot of talks in person before COVID, and I would ask the audience, how many Syrian refugees existed in 2011, and people would have all these different numbers, and nobody would have the real number, which is 0. Because Syria and refugee, those two words have become so much connected to each other. We can't even imagine a world without Syrian refugees. The number of population of Syrians before the war was around 24 million people. Today, over half of that amount are displaced either internally or have become refugees outside the country, with most of the Syrian refugees existing in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. Then you have them really dispersed across the world. So this war that is ongoing, and also that's something that people don't really think about, because if we don't hear it in the news, we don't think about it happening, but this war is continuous and it is still affecting a lot of people. And I would say that there's no Syrian family, no matter where you are from inside Syria and in the diaspora, that hasn't been affected directly by the conflict, that has displaced millions and has killed hundreds of thousands of people. So when you start from the number 0 and you get to this point in scale, every organization really had to completely shift and change, as well, adding on to it that the fact that a lot of when we are in the media and Syria has the attention, then there's a lot of funding, and then when you're not in the media, there's no funding, and all of these things are the kinds of the environment that Karam evolved in. So what we decided to focus on very early on, by the end of 2012, when there were a lot of IDP camps, internally displaced people camps in northern Syria, we wanted to focus on creativity, on education, on mental health, because we realized how the disruption in children's education really was taking a toll on young people in these camps. And so from there, all of our programming developed and evolves, and it continues to evolve. So that's a really big part of what we do. It's very much connected to what Sabine and Pascal were talking about, in that, being co-authors with people on the ground, having our programs being run and led by refugees, led by the community, led even by people who've actually used the services themselves and then became part of the team. This is very, very important for us. We learned that the only way that you can actually help people is by listening, and a fundamental question is asking people what they need, listening to the response, and developing solutions together. These are things we did even before we started working just on Syria. And it was mind-boggling to me that this is something that was very, very rarely done, and is still rarely done, to the point of, even when you talk about emergency aid, and I know, Yasmin, you're going to ask us about the earthquake later, but to the point where people, when you're having these kinds of, even in the emergency responses, when there's large scale food distribution or aid distribution, there's so many times these are coming from top down approaches that we don't even ask people what they want in terms of food or water or necessities, and so much waste happens when areas are delivered aid to multiple times. We see this so many times in northern Syria, where wherever you have access to is where agencies will deliver. It means that the people that actually need things aren't getting it, the people that don't need the things are getting it, people are getting things that they don't even want, and then it creates so much chaos on the ground locally that is completely unnecessary. And so this is something that we need to have better solutions that come from communities themselves. Karam Foundation is mostly, right now, we functioned really across Syria. We at some point we had programs in Lebanon and Jordan. Right now, most of our programs are happening inside Turkey in 2 locations, in Istanbul and in Reyhanli. And Reyhanli is a town right on the Syrian-Turkish border in southern Turkey. And it's a place where we've been working since 2012 and really built a presence there in the community. We have 2 community centers called Karam House, and they are innovation centers that they cater to families and mostly teenagers. Teenagers are our group of people that we focus on the most, ages 14 to 18, boys and girls. And our mission is to build 10,000 leaders by 2028. And the way that we do this is through 3 programs that are intersecting, which we call the Pathways to Leadership. And I can share my screen. So I will talk about our programs. This is our 2022 year in review report, and I thought to have some visuals, I'll talk about the programs. And I can share the link to this. And so we have our Karam Families program is a cash assistance program for vulnerable Syrian refugee families. We started this program in 2016, and we really target families that have children in child labor and children at risk of child marriages. And what we do is basically support these families with the cash stipend, as well as a lot of other support to the parents and mental health support, as well as tutoring for the kids, on condition that they send their kids to school. So we're trying to reverse, basically stop the interruption of education and get kids back into school. And this is just, these are the numbers that are in 2022. We've helped hundreds of families, and some of our biggest success stories are one of the early families, one of the first families that we supported back in 2015. One of the boys, Muhammad, was working at a gas station as a 14-year-old, and now he's in university and studying engineering. And so there's a lot of these situations where a very small intervention for an organization can result in huge impact and lives changed for people that get that kind of support. Our Karam Scholars program is a gap scholarship for students going into higher education in Turkey, and this has supported over 175 Syrian refugees. We were able to bring in 75 new scholars last year, which was a big number for us. As you can see, this is just for, in 2022, is the number of applications that we received for the 75 seats. So the need for funding for Syrian refugee students that are actually got accepted into Turkish universities, but do not have the funding. And we're not talking about tuition here. We're talking about the funding to actually be able to go to college and university, the books, the travel, the ability to quit the part-time job that they're doing to support their families. Those are the kinds of things. So these applications are people that have already been accepted, but have a financial hardship of actually going. And so this is also a life-changing support that gets people on the right path. And our scholars are all required to fulfill volunteering services for any organization of their choice. We encourage people to even support organizations locally, Turkish organizations, any cause that they're passionate about, because we believe that these kinds of interventions should be continuously paying forward the idea that as you become a leader, you support the next person, you support the people on the way, so that it will have a ripple effect of change. And innovative education is really what's happening at the core at the Karam houses, which is this is the program that is for teenagers, 14 to 18-year-olds. And this is a program that we've co-developed with an innovation school here in the United States in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I love this program because it's very close to architecture school, a design school. It's design-based learning. At Karam House, these kids have access to maker spaces, Wi-Fi, computers. It's a safe space. The mentors who teach them are engineers and designers and science teachers. The majority of them are Syrian refugees themselves. When we started, they were all Syrians that had studied like in universities in Syria. What's really exciting now is that we're hiring new mentors who are Syrians, who are graduates of Turkish universities, as well as Turkish people as well. And so we're beginning to actually even have we actually hired our first Karam Scholar graduate as our mentor last year, Yusuf. In this program, these students learn how to build projects, design things together, solve problems that are real life problems in their communities, work together, and deliver these solutions, be able to describe them orally, visually, and in writing, which in the end means when kids graduate from our program, and this is after school programming, then they have these what people call soft skills, which are in reality very hard skills of being a good team member, being a good leader, being able to explain your ideas. And we found that this takes people much further in their careers. And here's a couple of highlight stories. Sam is one of our graduates from Karam House who actually made it to Sweden with his family. This is very common of Syrian refugees being able to move around, or if they can move around. So he was able to get to Europe. When his family left Turkey, they had to leave very quickly, and he did not have his diploma with him. So when he applied to Swedish university, they did not accept him because he didn't have his paperwork. He was able to show them his Karam House portfolio and show them his projects and explain his projects, and he was accepted into university based on his work and his actual ability to explain his work. And so now he's in university in Sweden. Yasmin created an app in her time at Karam House, which helped people, Syrian refugees, connect with the medical services that they could get locally across the whole entire country of Turkey. She developed that while she was at Karam House. And Yusuf is actually our Karam Scholar graduate who we hired last year as a mentor, and he's one of our mentors right now at Karam House, and he's actually also applying to master's programs in Europe and in Turkey as well. So that's like a glimpse of our work and what we're dedicated to doing, because at the heart of it, we want to practice this idea that we call radical generosity, which means this deep investment in a big way in human beings and individuals, with the belief that when you're able to unlock the potential of people and give them the opportunity and the freedom to reach their full potential, then it'll turn around and it will create a much better result for themselves, their families, their communities, and the future. And so that's the kind of work that we do at Karam. And I'm excited to continue the conversation with the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lina. It's really fascinating to hear the ripple effect of your work. So you must be very proud of that within the communities. It's really incredible. Yeah, thank you all so much for your presentations. We will now move on to some questions that we could each individually ask. Okay, Sabine, we'll open up to you then. What do you think are some of the specific challenges that you would face by supporting displaced people?
Thanks, Yasmin. Just to say, sorry, before I go into your question, I love, Lina, what you were saying about radical generosity. I think that's such a brilliant way of looking at it. There are challenges to the radical generosity in the sense of the challenges in these contexts that we're working in. So I mean, like, Amira has currently active projects in Greece, the UK, Afghanistan, sort of really different contexts, and our Rights in Exile project works globally. All of the different contexts sort of have specific challenges, but there are commonalities as well. And I mean, increasing sort of securitization and the removal of rights and the eroding of legal status is very common and across the board, really. And we're all seeing it significantly everywhere that we are. Climate displacement, I think, also needs to be sort of mentioned, and it ties into this eroding of legal status. I mean, it presents huge challenges regarding legal status in light of the limitations of the Refugee Convention, which doesn't really address it, although there's lots of sort of discussion and analysis around that. It's tied to the eroding of legal status and the ongoing efforts to keep refugee communities in areas of climate instability, keep refugee communities outside of areas of Europe as we're seeing and otherwise. I mean, some examples, so for example, the floods in Pakistan last year, which had massive impact on Afghans displaced from Afghanistan in Pakistan with nowhere to go. The cyclone last month in the region that I'm in that affected displaced Rohingya communities, and communities, again, that don't have legal status and don't have access to protection and don't have anywhere to go. The list of these examples sort of can and sadly will go on. So the sort of fight for protection and for asylum spaces is so crucial, and for that fight to go wider than the current sort of narrow legal limitations to everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. And Pascal, I think you've come back in. Did you have anything to add to some of the specific challenges that you would find supporting displaced communities in the region that you work in as well?
One of the challenges that are there is a shortfall of resources, of course. Despite what you might have as an initiative, if you don't have resources, you will not be able to support the community you want to work with. However, there is also another challenge, such as trust. At some point, you lack trust from the actors on ground, like the organizations. You might need a support from, let's say, UNHCR for somebody to come in and support your initiative, and you won't get the support from UNHCR on ground or even the government. So that also remains a challenge that affects us to reach the community and also bring in our input to the community. And also some policies that are there limits us to impact the community, to bring our services to them, such as you find that registering refugee-led organizations is a challenge. And when it is a challenge, you're not able to resource for the organization. You're not able to do as much as you can do because you are not legally recognized. As much as some will be flexible with their funding to fund you, but whoever is going to fund you much won't be. Yes, back to Yasmin.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that. And Lina, I think you mentioned about funding as well. Is this something that you find a kind of one of the largest challenges?
Yeah, definitely finding the right resources and the funding in the way that it goes in cycles. It's a difficult challenge. I think also for Syrian refugees, specifically in Turkey, we're finding that it's difficult because as time passes, people think that people have resettled and they're okay and things are good. But for instance, specifically in Turkey, the situation with discrimination and racism against refugees, Syrian refugees and refugees in general, just in the past few years, in the past very few months, it's increasing. So like, for instance, the living situation of Syrians in Turkey has gotten worse over the years and not better. The political climate for specifically Syria, and I'm sure politics attaches to everything in all the places, but specifically in Syria right now, it's a difficult time when we're seeing also the world normalizing relationships with the Assad regime, and so that completely makes it affects the lives of Syrian refugees everywhere when there starts to be conversations about, will people be forced to return to places where they don't feel safe, forced to return to places where they no longer even have homes or resources. And so it feels like millions of lives now are at stake based on the geopolitical context, and that uncertainty adds on to really the uncertainty that Syrian refugees have lived through for now 12 years of never feeling that they are fully stable in where they are and where they've been building lives and where they've been having children, and children are growing up, and that becomes a very difficult space to actually live and exist in, because you'd always feel like you're never going to be able to move forward in life fully when you have your lives are threatened constantly by that uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if we kind of keeping with you, Lina, about especially how the recent earthquake would have impacted your work as well. How much of an effect has this had on the people that you work with and the work that you're giving out as well?
Oh, it has a massive impact. Reyhanli itself is in the area where the earthquake happened. And that the past few months is just an example of, you know, having what you have plans as an organization and people to like what we want to do and move forward with. And then the earthquake basically upended everything for our community, for people at Karam House, and especially in Antakya, which is Hatay, which is about 45 minutes north of where Raihanle is, and that city was completely devastated by the earthquake. We actually had many kids that would come to Karam House on the weekend, and sadly, we lost 10 of our students in the earthquake, along with their entire families. We've had people from our staff who lost their homes, and watching Syrians lose their homes once again because of this natural disaster. You know, an earthquake is always devastating wherever it happens at this magnitude, but an earthquake in a conflict zone, in a displacement zone, has such a large impact because it's the second, third, fourth, fifth time that people have lost their homes, and it's in a completely different way. I visited the area right after the earthquake a couple of weeks later, and I just couldn't get over the amount of fear that people were living in, that they even would describe to me as a fear that's more extreme than the entire war experience. Because I mean, for me, I don't think I'll ever be able to process the fact that when I went to Raihanle, and Raihanle as a town was actually not really destroyed in the earthquake. It only lost a couple of buildings, which is very strange because everything around it got destroyed. So it just became an impromptu camp for hundreds and thousands of people that are both Syrian and Turkish. So it became chaotic immediately. But everybody was living in tents, even though their buildings were standing. And so people were in fear of their home, and their homes were right in front of them. And that had an extremely deep psychological effect on everybody, no matter who you were, affected by this earthquake. And even I lived it just for a few days, and it was hard, like I couldn't sleep because we didn't know if the aftershocks were going to come and the building would fall. But people lived in that environment for over a month with their children. And so that kind of trauma just, I still don't know how we will be able to recover from that trauma. It felt like we went 10 years back in all of the progress that we did as a refugee community to kind of move forward in life, because a lot of what Karam does is really like push people forward, you know, that like really focusing on hope and the future, and the kids actually are the ones that lead us in that. And this was a big setback. But I'm hopeful in the sense that we were able to actually do a lot of activities in the camps, and we're going to be doing more of that in the summer. And a lot of these activities are actually being led by Karam House teenagers to do these programs for the kids in the camps. So it's a moment where it needs a lot more support. And one last thing is just I think what happens after an earthquake and any natural disaster, you have the attention of the world for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, and everybody's donating, and everybody's hearts are moved by this crisis, and everybody can feel empathy with an earthquake because it doesn't feel political or anything at all. Like, this is basically a natural disaster, but these crises need years of recovery. And so quickly we've forgotten about the earthquake, but the aid and the support that people need are not only in the first days, it's really the first months and the first years for people to be able to have homes and rebuild. So that's something that also we will be looking at very closely to make sure that that we can move forward.
Yes, it's so important that funding and the attention is continued, whereby it not be perhaps in the media always, but really funding needs to be continued. So yeah, thank you so much for that. And also, I mean, Pascal, just check that he's still on the scene, hopefully. Yeah, I mean, have you noticed because obviously there's been an escalation of violence in Sudan. How has this affected your work in Kenya?
Thank you again, Yasmin. The majority of Sudanese being forced to flee the current conflict in Sudan. Many of them are fleeing to Sudan, South Sudan, I mean, Ethiopia. We've not had a larger number of them to get into Kenya, but it has an impact on Sudanese who have already been in Kenya, taking courses, education, and go back to rebuild their countries. I have many friends from Sudan who have joined vocational trainings and technical courses in Kenya, hoping to go back to their country and get jobs that are going to allow them grow and do their own businesses. So they are having no hope now because they are not able to go back. So that makes them stay in the camp. The only issue that we have is that we have a constraint of resources, whereby we have many refugees coming in from Great Lake. And now if we are to add refugees coming from Sudan, that will be worse in terms of resources that should be relocated for refugees. Like currently we are having refugees who are staying in the reception center for more than 6 months, of which shouldn't happen. Refugees should just be in the reception centers for a week and then be located in the camp so that they can continue their journey of lives. So that is what we anticipate to see. If more Sudanese comes into Kenya, there will be constraint of resources. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And thank you for your contribution as well. Sabine, have you noticed any kind of impact of any recent events affecting any of the work that you've done as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be really sort of, I want to echo the points that both Lina and Pascal made, which I think is just emphasizing that these are things that are crucial. I mean, so we're seeing multiple displacements, we're seeing increased suffering, we're seeing these attempts to limit legal options. Earlier, when Pascal was giving his presentation, he was talking about the lack of access to documentation. In Sudan, I was speaking with a Sudanese former colleague yesterday who was talking about, refugees in Sudan who are then facing another displacement, but who don't have access to documentation. Those without documents can't leave the country and don't have safety internally. Where are they supposed to go? International organizations and states need to be held accountable, but also need to think about how to work together with people who are on the ground, not INGOs, not UN agencies, but local and refugee-led actors who know the needs and who are addressing them in situations where others leave. We saw it during COVID when everybody left, and it was refugee-led organizations who stayed and who were there on the ground doing the work and who knew what those needs were. As Lina said, making sure that the response that is provided is relevant actually and is what people need. And the other thing that I wanted to say, and again, it's really emphasizing what's already been said, is the impact of funding. We met a couple of weeks ago with some organizations who are interested in providing support for legal needs arising out of the Sudan conflict. But we're told clearly that finding money to do so would be really difficult because organizations are saturated. So following the Syria, Turkey earthquake, Afghanistan, Ukraine, the people are getting tired of funding. We are sort of working with a number of different partners on work looking at legal aid and pathways for Afghans. We cannot find the funds to do so properly. All of the organizations involved are doing it on the side of their work because there isn't funding available for the situation for Afghans. Funding, we're working with, we're providing this training for legal partners in Greece who are reporting that funding legal work in Greece is so difficult. That's why what SolidariTee is doing is really important. Like, despite the fact that there is a continuous horrendous situation for refugees there, that these services are as needed as ever, everyone's eyes have moved elsewhere. So that sort of sustained and creative funding that's properly targeted, that doesn't sort of leave one crisis and go to another, is really essential. Otherwise, all of our hands are tied and we're just going to be watching.
No, absolutely, definitely. Thank you so much for your contribution as well. Pascal and Lina in particular, you place a focus on working with young people, and Sabine, you've worked with a range of different communities as well. Why do you think this demographic of young people is particularly important, and are they often let out of other services usually? Maybe Lina first.
Yeah, thank you. For sure, we came upon it. When we started working in the camps, we were working with a younger group of people, mostly the children, and I quickly saw how teenagers were really kind of on the side, whether you're a boy or a girl. And we realized also again, it came back down to being requested to help in a specific way. So they had these challenges of, and then we're talking 2012, 13, people that had just been displaced in the past couple of years. If you're a teenager and you've had to flee your country and you're going to a neighboring country, especially with the language barrier between Arabic and Turkish, then you become very quickly, you could be a very good student or a student with a lot of prospects in Syria, and then you come in as a teenager and a high schooler in Turkey, and suddenly you look at that there's no way that you could be able to have the skills to have a good job or to be able to access higher education. It's just that be able to cross that boundary is it's impossible. And so we realized that we need to focus on teenagers the most, while kind of very like bolstering the support of families was really important, the support of scholars, but those kind of those were kind of two ends of that focus group that we wanted in the middle, which was 14 to 18. And so if you're a girl, being able to get these skills can delay marriages, get girls into university and open up that pathway. And for both boys and girls, really shift an entire lifetime of that would be to be on manual labor or jobs that are good enough for refugees that we would see a lot of, the tailor, the hairdresser, even if you talk about tech, like the coder, the call centers, it's like there's a whole group of jobs that you say okay, if we just do this, we can give these jobs to refugees, and we completely reject that approach, because people should do what they want to do and what they can do and have that kind of empowerment, and really uplifting dignity always is a big focus of Karam. So that's why we realized that we want to focus on teenagers and youth, and I would call them even young adults as well, up until their 20s. It's a very critical time, and it's the time where if we want to talk about investing, you can invest a small amount of time and that's targeted, that shifts them their lives forever. And I thought it was going to be a much longer runway for change. And sometimes it's a very short piece. Maybe it's like 6 months and you see a young person start somewhere and become something completely different in terms of their confidence, in terms of their agency, in terms of just embracing life in a new way. And that is something that's really, really powerful.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much. And this definitely has a ripple effect in the communities. Then for sure. And Pascal, you also work with young people predominantly.
Yes,
I wonder if you had any insights on that. Why is this demographic so important?
yes. I mean, my organization is offering education young refugees. It is interesting to say that I was doing a literature review for a research project, and I came to understand in the literature review that one of the challenges that refugees are facing to access higher education in a third country, it also has a play at the quality education that they receive when they are in the first country of asylum. That directed me to look at the children we have in the refugee camp, whereby they don't get that quality education. If I am to start giving them a quality education while they're still very young, they will be able to maximize these opportunities of scholarship to study in a country. And again, they will get that opportunity to decide for. It's a very important population to deal with, because when you look at the politics of Africa, jobless youth are mostly used into violence. Politicians use them purposely to cause chaos and also to drive their own agenda. And we have also experienced it in the camp, whereby in 2013, 2014, when South Sudan experienced a conflict clash, the economy bounced in 2015. Youth could not have support from their relatives back home. And as we are speaking now, we are facing the effect, whereby youth are now engaged in drug abuse. Youth are engaged in stealing. And we feel like if we are to empower these youth, they're able to also get jobs. They're also able to start their own businesses, and that will keep them busy and look forward to many opportunities ahead of them. That is why we are also dealing with youth, to equip them with digital skills that helps them to solve technical problems related to computers, and also open doors for them in the RSC pathway, so that they can look forward to do their masters and PhDs outside the camp. So that is the reason why we focused on children and youth. Back to Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Pascal. Yeah, it's really, really so important. And everyone is definitely echoing the same message. Sabine, I know you work with a number of different communities. Have you found this particular demographic really important as well?
I mean, undoubtedly. I think that, you know, one of the things I wanted to talk about in terms of particular demographics, and that, I mean, the impact on youth is really significant, as well as for the sort of wider population as well, is mental health. You know, the impact of displacement on mental health is huge. Reasons for displacement, the experiences on the journeys, the lack of safety, the lack of justice in host countries, and certainly for young people, and especially many unaccompanied young people, where the separation from family as well, and the impact that can have is just so huge. I mean, the studies have sort of shown and are finding that the rate of mental health issues is really significant. So there was a study recently, that found that 1 in 3 refugees it was looking at had diagnosable depression or PTSD. And when we're thinking then about sort of legal protection, we know that trauma, and you know, Lina was speaking really eloquently about that trauma, and there's such significant impact that has. We know that trauma results in distress and impairment in functioning that limits people's abilities to recount their histories, and that is found to be in sort of decision-making on asylum claims is what makes people found to be lacking in credibility. And so where people have been through horrendous experiences and then they're being told, you're not credible, we don't believe you, that leads to people being rejected, lacking legal status, lacking protection, denied access to justice. So sort of addressing mental health in legal representation and in decision-making and in the wider sort of refugee protection space is absolutely vital. Otherwise, everyone is going to be failed, and young people and the youth that Pascal and Lina and their organizations are doing so much for, that young people will experience that more than anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much for that. It's really, really important. And kind of our last kind of overall question, perhaps we could start with Lina. Traditionally, lots of international efforts to support displaced people have been led by groups, often from Western countries, with no direct experience of what affected communities are facing. What do you think are the next steps that groups working to support displaced people should take to support the shifting of power towards affected communities?
I think that Sabine and Pascal really spoke to this very eloquently. I continue to, there's things that large agencies and government agencies can do at a different scale than all of our kinds of organizations, and even organizations that are much bigger than us. There's just something of the power of the resources of access that they have access to so much. And I think what needs to happen is that co-authorship with people, local people on the ground, because, you know, I saw it firsthand many times, but most recently in the aftermath of the earthquake, is that there are certain things that large government agencies and large UN agencies can distribute, can reach, can mobilize very, very quickly. But what we're seeing is that they can do that, but that's actually not even an emergency situation even happening, because they can't really mobilize without having that access on the ground. And so I would love to see a lot more cooperation and partnership, instead of it being more, we see it most oftenly done as a funding partnerships, where that shift in power is actually not really happening. It's still more of a controlling piece between donor and donee, and it's just not that kind of empowerment, that putting dignity first, really prioritizing the experience, the lived experience, prioritizing refugee-led or people who have the lived experience-led organizations. It is still having that power dynamic. And I would say that if we were able to move past that, to have true partnerships, then I think the impact on the ground of locally led organizations, their impact would increase by so much. And as well, the impact of the government and the large NGO organizations would, their impact would increase by so much. It would be a win-win across the board, but you would have to really almost unshackle that power dynamic. And I don't know how to do how we would do that, like, you know, destroy the patriarchy. I don't know, but it's all there. I mean, Sabine, you spoke about it, and they're very, very big concepts, but we all know what should be done, and they know too. And so it's these long living systems that just have to be undone, and let people do the work themselves. They know what they need. They know what their community needs. And they've been through the worst kinds of circumstances that would actually, if any of us lived in those circumstances, we would find it very difficult to exist. And these circumstances come from, you know, wars and natural disasters. But I don't think people see that, you know, humanity of that luck of which side we're on, and just because of the sheer luck of where we were born and where we are, and kind of let that go, and actually have that true partnership and true co-authorship happening between organizations and communities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely, that definitely needs to happen more, I think. Yeah, thank you so much for your contribution to that. And yeah, I mean, Sabine, you touched on that as well, with kind of larger corporations and organizations. What do you have anything to add to this as well?
I mean, only really in support for what Lina is saying. I mean, she's absolutely right. This sort of funding approach at the moment, which is really in the control of donors and the big organizations, and is very much funding. There has been a move to funding more local and refugee-led organizations, but under the in line with the priorities of others, really. And where there is funding without support for infrastructure, without support for what is needed to be in place for projects, these co-authored projects, actually to properly be developed, without that, it's going to be ineffective, and we're setting people and organizations up to fail, really. So, you know, making sure that affected communities are not being used for other people's purposes, but actually being used to respond to needs and further rights through sort of well-resourced and meaningful collaboration. I mean, that's it, and that, I mean, really seems to be the message that's coming out of this, and it's true.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for all of your comments, and for telling us all about your work. and how we can move forward in the future to create long-term solutions. It's really so important that we get the global perspective, especially us at SolidariTee. We really like to think about the long-term solutions, and obviously we kind of provide our work within more of a European context, so it's really important for us to hear outside of this as well. So yeah, thank you so much for your comments and for sharing your experiences of this. Thank you all so much also for listening. It's been really great that we've had an audience for our fantastic expert speakers. We're really so honoured to have them. So yeah, thank you also so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yasmin, and thanks
you.
everybody for coming. Thanks, Lina and Pascal. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so
Thanks,
much for being here, everyone. And we look forward to hearing about your work in the future.